Okay, emotional hijacking. Uh, and you're looking at a picture of the brain, different little color-coded picture, something that we all have and use every day. But a lot of times we really don't understand what's going on up there. So we are often told, look before you leap, or think before you engage in some action. And yet, frequently we find ourselves acting first, leaping first, and often regretting our actions later, and wondering why. Why did I do that? When it now in retrospect clearly was not a good decision. So it's really good, since this happens frequently, and I think particularly for people who are coming to a teaching and therapeutic community, they probably have a background of regretted decisions. George Santayana said, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." But for us, if we really don't understand our own emotional mechanics, then it is likely that we'll kind of continue to take action without really thought or reason, and we make mistakes that not only affect our lives, but other people's lives are affected by our bad decisions, our not very well thought out decisions. So let's talk about this. So it's pretty valuable to really figure out, okay, why does this happen, and what can we do about it? So as mammals developed over millennia, new layers of the brain developed. You have this core brain, which kind of every mammal has, which kind of controls your breathing and temperature regulation and things like that we do that are unconscious. But this new layer of brain tissues surrounded that brain stem, which is sometimes called the reptilian mind, because it's the most basic functions, which kind of our survival, bodily functions. So this limbic system, and that's from the Latin limbus, which means ring, so it kind of ringed around the ancient brain, the brain stem, added emotions to this real basic functioning. So craving, fury, love, dread were all things that got added. And you're looking at a picture now which shows all these different things are wrapped around the brain stem. And you can see the hippocampus, you can see the thalamus, the fornix, the cortex, and all these different brain parts that we know they're up there, we just don't think about them much. Okay. So the neocortex, neo from new cortex, the mammalian brain took a great leap forward and added several more layers of brain cells, which is really the part of our brain that is capable of strategizing, long-term planning, higher level thinking. So art, ideas, symbols, imagination, language, all critical, and that's the neocortex. And here we have a picture of the neocortex, and and where it is, the frontal lobe, parietal lobe. But despite the fact that this is the seat of higher levels of thought and of language, the neocortex isn't always in charge, which is good and bad. as we'll look at. Because the limbic or the emotional brain is intertwined with the neocortex, which gives the emotional centers a lot of power to influence the rest of the brain. So here's a term you want to get familiar with. It's called the amygdala. Amygdala is from the Greek word, it's a Greek word, and it's from the Greek is almond, is an amygdala, and the thing is, you have these two little diamond or almond-shaped clusters above the brainstem, near the bottom of the limbic ring, one on each side of the head, and the amygdala and the hippocampus do most of the brain's learning and remembering. So the amygdala is really the specialist for emotional situations. And that's why it's so important for us. And you're looking now at a picture of the limbic system, and you're seeing a picture of the amygdala and its location. So what does it do? Well, we can kind of find out what happens if you take it away. What happens is what is really called emotional blindness. People they live in the same world as we do, but it's almost like they're like being colorblind. Things are black and white, but instead you're looking at situations, there's no emotions at all. You don't feel anything, literally. Not physically, but emotionally. You don't have an ability to register emotions. So the amygdala is kind of a storehouse of emotional memories. So animals who lose their amygdala don't respond normally, or as we'd expect them, with fear, with anxiety, with or aggression. Humans don't cry anymore, don't shed tears, no matter what happens. So it really is a way of thinking about going from color to black and white, but it's just in your emotions. So the amygdala, you say, okay, what was the survival value? Because we know that we are evolutionary creatures. We evolved and we kept certain characteristics because they were very vital for our survival. So the amygdala is one of the important things about the amygdala is it is constantly saying, am I in danger? Okay. Well, if you're out on the plains with wild animals, as our predecessors were, pretty good to have one of these functions, like, am I, because you were, unlike today, you were somebody's lunch, if you're not pretty damn careful, So when the answer is yes, I'm in danger, the amygdala secretes hormones and mobilizes centers for movement, activates the cardiovascular system and the adrenaline system for an emergency response. Like, I'm in danger. Okay, it's kind of like punch punch down on the gas pedal and let's get moving here. So the amygdala allows it, because of where it's located and how it's evolved, to control most of the rest of the brain in this kind of a situation. So researchers have showed that as we see things or hear things go to the thalamus and then right to the amygdala. Boom, straight, no diversions, no loop, boom, right to the amygdala, so that it is constantly looking for, am I in trouble? Am I in danger? Is there a threat? A second signal gets routed to the neocortex, the thinking part of the brain. But the way this works, the amygdala gets a chance to weigh in before the brain does, okay? Which is pretty valuable from a survival point of view. If a saber-toothed tiger is approaching, You don't want to go into a serious pondering about, is he hungry? Is he not hungry? Is this, do a Wikipedia search on animal behavior. You want to be up a tree like now. And so the amygdala is going to help with that because it tells you move, immediately. And you can think about this later, okay? If I'm wrong, hey, okay. But if I'm right, I just saved your life, right? So that's how powerful that amygdala is. And here you're seeing a picture which I can give you actually a little story about. You're seeing the thalamus, you're seeing the amygdala, and you're seeing the visual cortex. And the person in this picture is looking at a rattlesnake. And I remember very vividly, I'm hiking with somebody, this is 20 years ago or something like that, and I'm walking along, talking, of course, to whoever I was walking with, and I see in front of me what turned out to be a bent stick, okay? Now, I'm in rattlesnake country, so rattlesnakes are a clear and present danger in this area. And I jumped back. I mean, I was airborne, and immediately. Then I landed, a few feet back. I yelled, because my companion's here. And then I looked and I said, oh, it's a stick. Nothing, no worry. That's an amygdala response. Basically, the amygdala said that looks like, and the amygdala is not so great at identifying things. It identifies patterns and remembers patterns. So it doesn't look for the scales or is there a rattle on the end of this. It's just like, looks like, move, okay? And that was a perfect example in my own life of a total amygdala response to a situation which, in fact, there was no danger. But had there been a rattlesnake, it would have been the right response to make. So the hippocampus makes sense of patterns. The amygdala puts the flavor, the emotional flavor, to these facts. The hippocampus tells you, oh, it's my cousin. The amygdala tells you, I don't like her. Okay? Okay. So you understand that, okay. So the brain really has two memory systems, one for emotionally charged memories and one for other memories. And the amygdala stores those emotionally charged memories. So it can recognize, so once the hippocampus kind of recognizes it, it sends it to the amygdala, and the amygdala says, whoa, time to do something, okay? So obviously there's an evolutionary advantage to having a part of your brain respond and quickly activate to a dangerous situation. That's how we survive. It also can remember things that are very pleasurable, and recognize those. So we're drawn to those things, like, wow, whatever that is, something that gave us a lot of pleasure. One of the problems with addiction, okay, something that was pleasurable, we are drawn to it because that emotional memory, we remember the good feeling, okay, even if the long-term effect of it was bad. Okay? But, an emotional memory can be not a very good guide for your present behavior. The amygdala compares what it's dealing with now, but it does it in a kind of a crude, kind of sloppy way. And it acts without full information, and it circumvents your higher thought processes, which will say, well, wait a minute. Let me think about this for a minute before I act on it. What do we know about people who are coming into a therapeutic community or other kinds of healing processes, we know that the majority of them, maybe all of them in some ways, but certainly the majority of them, have had painful, traumatic experiences. And guess what? The amygdala has stored every one of them, okay? And is ready to act on your behalf, okay, whether you want it to or not. And before you have a chance to really think about it. So that's what we call it, emotional hijacking. You literally can be hijacked by the amygdala because of these very painful, traumatic memories that are stored there. Early childhood experiences, being physically abused, being bullied constantly, being shamed. Post-traumatic stress disorder is really, what are we talking about? We're talking about the amygdala storing these painful memories. I remember one of my friends who was a Vietnam vet, every time he heard a helicopter, he was just completely destroyed because he'd been a helicopter pilot in Vietnam. And most of the people who were his fellow helicopter pilots died. They didn't make it back, okay? And the sound of a helicopter was like an amygdala response on steroids, you know. It meant, you know, somebody was going to get killed and there was going to be some action. A rape or some kind of other violence that occurs in your life. Even situations, you know, that we would consider relationship things that are extremely painful and traumatic. And so the next time you see somebody who reminds you of, that may trigger an amygdala response. People say they have, I have an authority problem. Well, where did that come from? That's an amygdala problem. Something happened. So here's a emotional hijacking. The samurai challenges a Zen monk. He says, explain the concept of heaven and hell. The monk says, you're a lout. I can't waste my time. The samurai says, I'll kill you. The monk says, that's hell. The samurai then apologizes. Monk says, that's heaven. Okay. But it's a little example of emotional hijacking. I mean, as soon as this guy says you're a lout, there's an emotional reaction and, you know, a violent response. So this isn't about IQ. This isn't how smart you are or how clever you are. This is really something else. This is really understanding this dynamic that's sort of built in. This is like when you get a car, you want to read the manual, or you get a new piece of equipment, you want to read the manual. How does this thing operate so I don't make some dumb mistake with it? We don't get a manual for our brain. When no one tells us, like, by the way, every time you have one of these really painful experiences in your life, it's going to get put in memory and be ready to be activated without you having very much say in the decision you're going to make. So people who are very, very clever and function very well often make really ridiculous choices in their businesses or their personal lives, obsess about really simple decisions, all because of this mechanism. Very often we have, and we also find a lot of times, people who are really raging a great deal of the time. And where does that rage come from? In many cases, it comes from the feeling of being threatened. Being threatened physically, but being threatened by being ignored or put down or sneered and laughed at or somehow diminished. So it isn't, the amygdala doesn't just recognize physical danger, it recognizes danger to your sense of integrity about yourself and your value to yourself. There was a great comedy bit years and years and years ago where a guy is sitting in a plane and he looks out the window and he sees the engine is on fire. And then he says, but I really don't want to say anything because what if I'm wrong? Okay. Well, what if you're right? Okay. But that sense of like, I don't want anybody to laugh at me or say, well, of course it's, there's some flame coming out of there. That's what it's supposed to do. Really. So we become threatened not only by physical harm to us, but by psychological harm to us. And that can be very, very traumatic. And so in many cases, the rage that we express is out of this feeling of being psychologically threatened. And our response is we can either have the fight or the flight mechanism. Okay? I mean, there's really kind of two responses to a crisis. Either run toward it and challenge it or run away from it. And so the rage response is, I remember we had this one guy in Synanon, and we were having a circle, and somebody was really on him, and he said, no one has ever talked to me like that and lived. And I think he was right, okay. But, so, what do we do about that when we have these kind of rage responses? Well, first of all, we have to become students of ourselves and of our own responses. So we have to kind of get ahead of the amygdala to some extent. We have to start recognizing, here's a situation, and if I go into this situation, there's a very good chance that I'm going to get triggered. Okay? So you start doing some prep ahead of time to really engage the higher levels of thought. You just don't go in blind and let it happen. You begin to calculate how you might respond and begin to take steps so that you do not respond that way because you know the response will be irrational and inappropriate. Okay? That's pretty sophisticated, but that's what we need to do in order to drive our car, because we are the car, okay? And if we don't drive it and we let go of the steering wheel, we know what happens in the car. The car goes in the ditch. With ourselves, if we do not understand the mechanism of our brain and how we react, we go into the ditch because we are the car without a driver. So when we understand that when we get really, really enraged, that our higher brain functions go away, that the amygdala is going to take over and drive the car in a fairly reckless manner. So being aware of situations where we're going to get triggered is really, really important. And, taking steps. Sometimes you see a situation, you start feeling yourself, okay, time to kind of back off. Let's go take a walk. Let me think about this. There's a variety of de-escalation techniques. Now we're not de-escalating somebody else, we're de-escalating ourselves. Okay? There is a fallacy called the ventilation fallacy. In early therapeutic communities, in many cases, we encourage people to rage and cathart. If you've seen the film T.C. Pioneers, you hear Al Campora talk about, I just raged and carried on, and it was really, really good for me. I don't know how good it was for the other people, but okay. But we really, there was kind of a theory that allowing all this rage out over and over and over again was a good way of handling anger and getting it out. But what happened as people really began studying this is they realized that people who raged all the time just got very good at raging. They, in fact, produced more rage, not less, as a result of practicing being rageful. So the threshold for rage got lower and lower. So one of the great Tibetan teachers said, don't suppress it, but don't act on it. It doesn't mean you have to, just not be angry ever. You just have to be aware that being rageful is going to trigger your amygdala, and then you're kind of you've kind of left your higher thought processes, and you're liable to do some things that you're going to really regret, and other people are going to regret as well around you. So we used to call it, originally when people were studying Zen, they said it's attack therapy, or call the encounter group a verbal street fight, or breaking someone down. There was a sense you had to break somebody down so then you could build them up, break this false shell that people had around them. So we understand today much more that the means are the ends. That when we break people down, we don't need to break people down. They're already pretty broken down. The reason they're coming to us is because they're broken down. What we need to do is help them understand their emotions, manage their emotions, to become emotionally literate, to learn how to use their emotional intelligence to connect with other people, to read other people's emotions and read their own emotions. Because we don't want black and white life. We want the full color of life is the joy of our emotional life. But not an emotional life devoid of thinking and of using rational thought. We want to find that balance. Okay, and we don't want to let the amygdala and traumatic experiences we've had in the past take off with us. I had an experience years ago, and when I was trying to describe the amygdala, the situation of being out of control, there were a couple of Arabian horses, and somebody convinced me that it would be a good idea to ride an Arabian horse. I got on this horse, and in about 30 seconds, I was going what appeared to me about 75 miles an hour. I don't think a horse can run that fast, but it was the fastest on land with an animal I have ever been in my life, and I could not stop this damn horse. I mean, I was pulling the thing like this, and this horse was, and he was heading toward a fence, and I knew, okay, I made a mistake. I got on the horse. I'm going to die now. Okay, but he stopped, fortunately, and I got off and never got on again. But that's the amygdala, that runaway horse, when you have completely lost control, and the horse, the amygdala, is definitely in charge, and